What is going on? John Middlekauff, 3 and Out podcast. Need you to go subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, the Volumes YouTube channel. If you're watching this, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends. You can listen to us on AMP, every one of these shows, and a lot going on, divisional round, a lot of coaching buzz, a lot to discuss coming up. But before we do, can I tell you about my friends at Gametime? Here's what I need you to do. Go to the App Store and download the fastest growing ticket app called Gametime. And when you do, sign up, use the promo code JOHN, that's John, and get $20 off your first purchase. I'm going to an NHL game, my first ever hockey game. I might become a big hockey guy. Hell, I might start a hockey podcast. Love it so much. I'm going, check out the Coyotes, playing the Washington Capitals Thursday night because of my friends at Gametime. I went, downloaded the app, promo code John, boom, I'm going. Hockey, basketball, college and pro, the NFL. You live in one of these cities. You live in Philly or San Francisco or Kansas. I guess the games could potentially next week in Atlanta. And you want to go to these games, concerts, you name it. Take your son, take your wife, take your girlfriend, take your brother. Gametime. Fastest growing ticket app going right now. I swear by them. I use them. And I want you to too. So download the app, promo code JOHN, John, fastest growing ticket app in America, and get yourself some tickets on me. No big deal. Okay, before we dive into some of the games and my thoughts on the games, and because listen, this weekend's fantastic. One thing we saw last week, no matter how big the spread is, you got to stay locked and loaded. I mean, the Dolphins were 13-point underdogs, and that game was riveting. So I wasn't that excited. Then the games happened. The Ravens game with the Bengals, Tyler Huntley. It's the playoffs, man. Crazy things happen. We will dive into those at the end of the show. But I wanted to dive in on two things: coaching, some of the buzz with all the guys moving places, Sean Payton stuff, and Aaron Rodgers. We'll start with coaching buzz. And one of my mottos on this show, I don't view myself as a teacher, but I am such a big believer on this because I think so many people resent money, don't understand money. A lot of people that I don't consider myself in the media. This is an entertainment product. I have two goals: to try to entertain you and make money. I didn't go to Big J journalism school. I am not, this is just opinions. I'm not searching for the truth. I'm just here to entertain you guys. Hopefully I do a good job. But I think a lot of people in the media really resent business. And I think a lot of people struggle with it because money is all relative. Money is all relative. Listen, whenever you first start out as a professional, you're probably not making much. And you do whatever you have to do to survive in terms of eating, where you're staying. And then you get older, mid-30s, late 30s, 40s. You get married, you have a kid. You can't even imagine living where you live. Why? You have more money. If you are doing well and your income doubles or triples, you probably don't eat at the same restaurants you ate at years ago. Right? I used to eat. Now, as guys, we used to always have a soft spot for fast food. But I'm just saying, if you're going on a date with your wife, it might be a little different than if you dated her when you guys were both 22, if you're now 40 and you're having some success. It's no different in business. When you start a business or the infancy of a business and you're not funded by big VCs, you're probably pretty tight with decisions when investing in stuff, when buying stuff. Like, you don't just waste money. Why? Because money matters. The bigger you get, and you saw some of these tech companies over the last decades, you start throwing around some cash. You don't view it the same. It's no different in the NFL. Once upon a time, the NFL was not some behemoth cash cow. I was watching Major League the other day with Charlie Sheen, Wesley Snipes. And back in when I was really, really young, when I was born in the 80s, I think if you ever, and listen, I didn't live it, but I've read about it. Pro sports was not making the money that it is now. Well, why is that the case? Because television rights were nowhere near the cash and profitable, amounts of money that they're giving the leagues. And obviously with corporate sponsorships, with suites, the business model for pro sports has dramatically changed. And in the NFL, where they're making more money than they ever dreamed of making, they get at minimum, if you don't make a penny anywhere outside your building, which is basically impossible. Most of these teams, from suites to you name it, surrounding the team, generating revenue. They do $200-300 million. Some of these teams do $500 million separate from the money the league gives them. And the money the league gives them is $300 million. Well, the salary cap is $200 million. And obviously the payment to players is unlike most of your employees, right? Like even the team president, what does he make? A couple $1 million max. You don't have a lot of 7-figure employees beside non-coaches in your building. And a lot of them, anyone that's listening to this that's worked in ticket sales or anything, they ain't making much money. They have to generate money to earn the money. So the amount of money these teams make to pay coaching staffs, it's a line item. So when I see that Sean Payton, one of the stories today, wants $20 million, if I would have told an owner that 30 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe their jaw hits the floor. Because I remember when Mike Holmgren, I remember reading an article, Mike Holmgren, when he left Green Bay and I can't remember, he got traded or they let him out of his contract and he went to Seattle financially and he signed a big deal. He was making $4 million a year, which was enormous cash. Even though John Madden, who was calling the games, was making double that. It was a lot of money at the time. Now, $4 million, like that's Zach Taylor, Brandon Staley money. Zach Taylor got an extension, I think, last year. But you know what I mean? That's the lowest level of an NFL coach. I honestly think the lowest paid NFL coach is probably closer to $5 million than $4. I think it's over $5. The majority of coaches now making $7 to $9, and then the top guys make $12 to $15. Maybe Belichick, because he's been there so long, makes $20. Right? But when you really think about it, paying an NFL coach $20 million, what's Kyle Shanahan worth to the Yorks? He has won 3 playoff games in 12 months. He has been to several conference championships. Before he got there, the team was a disaster. Everyone in the area talked shit about him. Now, 3 of the last 4 years, they're just rattling off playoff victories. He's easily worth $40 million. If Jed York paid him $40 million, he would not lose a penny. The money he's making back with them having success. Now, you get paid what the market bears, and there's no one else willing to pay 40. But my point is that, so Sean Payton, let's just say, wants $25 million a year. That's what he's telling people. Most people are like, owners, can't do that. You can't? What is winning worth to you? Because when you win in the league, your franchise prints money. You're already guaranteed the ability to pay this coach. It's not like the late 80s. Where I had to fill up my stadium, I had to get every ounce out of my corporate dollars, and I had to have, I had to win. Hell, you don't even need to win now to make money in the NFL. So when I see that he wants a lot of money, I go, he's worth every penny. If he guarantees you winning, and when you look at his Saints history, he guarantees you get Sean Payton. Hell, you go, well, he had Drew Brees. Well, I saw 1 year without Drew Brees. He went 9-8 with 4 fucking different quarterbacks. One name was Ian Book. The guys he was playing at quarterback the year after Drew Brees retired, most coaches, if I gave Patricia, Joe Judge, just your average coach around the NFL, Pat Shurmur, Todd Bowles, I mean, you name it. I don't think they win 5 games. Dennis Allen. If I gave Dennis Allen last year's New Orleans Saints team, I think they struggle to win 5 or 6 games. So Sean Payton immediately, like, I just never understand these numbers, like, because Dean Spanos, I had someone, and listen, I don't bring a lot of like people talking shit about me on social media, whatever. Like I've learned none of it matters. I think Twitter, Instagram, it's all fake world, right? Because the conversations that we have in reality, in real life, when you're sitting down with friends, with business partners, never quite sound like the conversations that are happening on the internet. So when someone comes after me and whatever, it's like, I don't even care. Now, sometimes I interact, I'm bored sitting on the couch, whatever, but I don't actually think it's real life. And this guy, but I think in general, you can say this about anyone who gives their opinion for a living. That's what I do. I give my opinion for a living. I observe and then I give my opinion. Doesn't mean I'm right or wrong. I'm just giving you my opinion in an entertainment fashion, and we monetize it. That's the business I'm in. He's like, you're just a hater of Brandon Staley. I'm not a hater of Brandon Staley. I just don't think he's a good head coach. And honestly, when I say he's a fraud coach, I don't think he's a fraud, like doesn't understand football. I think he understands coverages, the defensive scheme. Like I think his intellectual capacity when it comes to football is probably pretty good. I think when I watch him talk, he speaks like a politician. I see a fake guy in a league that demands real. What do players always say? That they sniff out when you're not being real with them. That's why Andy Reid, who I had a front row seat on, is just every single person that played for Andy Reid will tell you, he just tells it like it is. And he doesn't try to be a politician. He's just being himself. Now, maybe Brandon Staley is like fake phony. That's his natural, inclination to act like that. I don't know. I've heard people that work with him, and I've heard other shows say this. I had heard the same thing, kind of a know-it-all, which is kind of weird. He's only been in the league, 6-7 years. It's not like he's a 25-year lifer. He had been working at a small school before he got to the NFL. And listen, I've worked in college football. Just because you work at a smaller school does not mean you're not a fantastic coach. My point is to be a know-it-all in the NFL. Bill Belichick's a know-it-all in the NFL. And even he gets things wrong. He's worked in the NFL for 50 years. Andy Reid, Pete Carroll, these guys have been working in the NFL since the early 90s, late 80s. Like your point of reference is just dramatically different than a guy that came in when the all-pro team included like Khalil Mack and J.J. Watt. Like, do you remember Troy Aikman and Larry Allen? Like, if you coached against guys like that, your perspective is just dramatically different. And I think when you see that Dean Spanos is firing all these coaches, and when I say Dean Spanos, because clearly he tells Brandon Staley, you got to fire a bunch of coaches. And I always find it funny that this guy was good enough when he hired them throughout the season, and then the moment the season ended, they're village idiots, which, of course, he's going to say that because he wants to keep his job. And his job, in theory, is fantastic. He's got, Justin Herbert as his quarterback. And, he's going to be competitive because they do have a lot of talent, and Telesco's a pretty good GM. But he fires the offensive coordinators because they don't want to fire Brandon Staley. And I think it's so short-sighted, right? This notion that, because one of the things that, not even that I've heard, it's clear, the owner is cheap. And because he's cheap, knowing that Sean Payton costs $20 million, and he might have to give up pick 21 to acquire him, he wants no part of that. So he'll roll it back with Brandon Staley. Imagine that. You could argue the most important person in your building is not actually the quarterback, because the majority of quarterbacks are not going to be like Peyton Manning or Tom Brady that transcend coaches. Typically the most important guy with the Chiefs is Andy. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes has elevated to his equal or maybe above him, but is Patrick Mahomes without Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs? Probably not. And honestly, he'd probably tell you that. Look at Josh Allen. That Josh Allen, 1 year without Brian Daboll, doesn't quite look the same. Still an awesome player, but it's just not quite the same. So this notion that I'm being cheap when money's not an issue, I would understand. It's like, John, this franchise, they just don't generate. Like the reason Tampa Bay or the Oakland A's, I always hear this with Oakland A's fans, like, our owner has a bunch of money. Yeah, he does, but your business doesn't. Your business doesn't generate any money. Nobody watches and no one attends. So it's like, yeah, he could put his own money into it and then he would lose it. So the business has to generate it. And Spanos, while he inherited all his wealth, and nothing drives me more up a wall than people that, like, if you make your own money from, like they always say, like Michael Jordan's cheap, Tiger Woods is cheap. Guess what? And I'm sure there are several like Tim Cook, or I don't know if they're cheap, but I'm just saying there are probably super successful CEOs, billionaire hedge fund guys who are also cheap. If you make your own money, you can do whatever the fuck you want with it. Now, we can judge you about it, but it is your decision. You made that money. Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, like they've generated it all. If they want to be cheap, that's their prerogative. To me, I judge you when you inherit your money and you're still cheap. Like, I just think you're kind of a loser. Like, you're kind of dumb because it's not like you generated that thing. You just had your dad or your grandpa hand it to you, and then you're still going to be cheap, especially when it comes to the most important person in that organization, which is the head coach. And they refuse to pay any money for that head coach. You can fire Lombardi. You can fire the quarterback coach. Like, give me a fucking break. Who's taking that job? Like, honestly, who's taking that? Because it could potentially be one and done. If you go 10 wins again or bounce in the first round, see ya. And we all know, like, we're never getting fooled again. We're all picking the Chiefs next year to win the AFC West. Why? Because the Chiefs win the AFC West every single year. And you would say just, it'll be hard for the Raiders and the Broncos to be as shitty as they were this year. So when you look at the Chargers, like, you had a pretty good opportunity. The Raiders built that thing was a bumpy road that led to disaster. The Broncos, the building was on fire the entire year. It's going to be hard for those two teams to be as dysfunctional as they were. Maybe the Raiders. I mean, the Raiders stay pretty dysfunctional. But you would say the Broncos, maybe they just pay for a coach. Who knows? Maybe they buy Payton. You had the opportunity because Sean Payton 100% is taking your job. But you love keeping that extra money in your pocket. Shame on you, Dean Spanos. Shame on you, Chargers, because that's embarrassing. honestly. I mean, you have probably a pretty good coordinator. And that's what he is, a coordinator. And there's nothing wrong. You know the best part about being a number 2 in the NFL? You get paid a premium. Vic Fangio is currently asking for $5 to $6 million. And you know what? Probably worth every penny. And a guy like Brandon Staley as a defensive coordinator, probably making 2 or 3. It's a great life. How many, beside like Apple and Facebook and some of the biggest companies in the world, pay their number 2, $2.5 to $3 million? That more because so many head coaches now are offensive coordinators. More defensive coordinators now make more money than guys that are pure offensive coordinators, right? Like Ben Johnson, for example, who just got retained with the Lions, probably is one of now the highest paid offensive coordinators in the league. But he is a true offensive coordinator, right? Obviously, Kyle Shanahan's and the Andy Reids and the Sean McVays, like they're also the head coach, so they're making a ton of money, but they call the plays. So these, like Sean McDermott, Brian Daboll was making a lot of money. And think about that. The Chargers a couple years ago, Telesco went to college with Brian Daboll, had the chance to hire him and didn't, and they went with Brandon Staley. Now, it's not necessarily Telesco's call. I mean, it's the ownership's. But the Chargers, they're just so small-minded. It is really crazy for this organization that historically in my life has had a ton of good players and now back to back really good quarterbacks. But they just go cheap on the coach. And you go cheap on the coach, you deserve what's coming. Some other stuff today, some firings that happened. Probably 2 of the bigger name firings are Greg Roman, fired from the Baltimore Ravens, which phone's ringing. Greg Roman fired. And, this is the Harbaugh brothers have both had him, and it both ended pretty ugly. Now, who knows how this would have ended if Lamar could have stayed healthy, but clearly the passing game was not working. I don't know if they had much talent on the offensive weaponry. Obviously, their first-round pick gets injured, but Greg Roman now has had 2 stints with both Harbaugh brothers, and it just has not ended well. It really hasn't. The guy can really scheme the quarterback running game. He can scheme the running game just in general. But when it comes to the modern-day passing game, you would say that's not Greg Roman's forte. And maybe he would tell you, well, give me a real quarterback who can pass. And I'd say, well, Lamar Jackson had some moments. And he'd say, well, yeah, I was the offensive coordinator when he won the MVP. But now it'll be fascinating. I saw Eric DeCosta, the GM, said that, he looks forward to negotiating with Lamar. Maybe that's just, playing possum. Maybe that's being truthful. Maybe that's just the thing you have to say. But that's one of the bigger stories in the NFL. Byron Leftwich. And it shows you why any any coach, and listen, I've been lucky enough to work with guys that become head coaches. They always tell you, in college and the pro, when you get offered head coaching jobs, if you don't have, like Sean Payton has options, right? When Andy Reid got fired from the Eagles, he was going to have options. Jim Harbaugh, options. Like certain coaches, small percentage of them have a ton of options. Most guys do not. And when you get the opportunity, you have to jump at it. And last year, Byron Leftwich got offered the Jacksonville Jaguars head coaching job, but he didn't take it because he did not want to work with Trent Baalke. And let's listen, Trent Baalke's resume got some red flags on it. But Doug Peterson, clearly, like, I'll figure it out. I'll do it. And look at him. He's in the second round of the playoffs. He won the division. He's 9-8. And just in 1 year, it went from like, Doug had an incredible run with the Eagles, but who knows? Is anyone going to hire him? To now being like, maybe Doug's a real deal. Maybe Doug's a big-time program builder. Maybe Doug is a type guy you'd want as your head coach. And who's he coaching? One of the better prospects we've seen in recent memory. So you got to strike when the iron's hot. I don't always agree with that. And I tell coaches, like, I don't know if I'd take that job. And again, not that they're just bullshitting with me. When they're asking, like, I'm going to do this, I'm like, sometimes I don't even say anything. I'm thinking in the back of my head, like, I wouldn't want that job. You're going to get fired. And they're like, well, if I have success here, I'm off like a rocket ship. And look at Byron Leftwich. He's now fired. He's not going to be an offensive coordinator anymore. He's going to have to probably go back to being a quarterback coach and then work his way back up. And here's the other thing. And I think it's funny. Everyone destroyed Bruce Arians. Like, Bruce Arians is messing with Tom. He's messing with Byron. We have a long history of Bruce Arians. He's successful. When he runs an offense, they score points, and they're pretty good. You remove Bruce Arians, and you let Tom and Byron just kind of figure it out on their own. We saw what happened. It was pretty ugly. So good year for Bruce Arians stock. 2 GMs were hired. Monty Osenfort, I might be saying his name wrong, bald guy, rooting for him, came to Arizona. As someone in the NFL texts me, like, listen, $3-4 million a year, Live in Scottsdale, pretty good gig, which I agree. It's a great place to live. Fucking love it. I wish I would have moved here years before I did. Tough job, though. Really is, because you're all in on Kyler Murray. Well, you're not actually all in on him, but your contract is stuck with him. So that obviously they're interviewing head coaches. I would guess, don't have any inside information, that he ends up hiring Brian Flores. Patriot guy, worked for the Patriots forever, talked to some people that worked around Monty. Very impressive guy. High character, low ego, good at his job. So people really like him. He spent the majority of his career with the Patriots, but also worked for the Texans and then worked for the Titans. People talk to a guy that knows him really well, loves him. Very well liked. To me, your biggest hire, like we always got to draft well. The number one thing an NFL coach has to do, an NFL GM has to do, is hire the right coach. So his job right now all comes down to that. It went from them hiring co-coordinating GMs and keeping Vance Joseph to actually we'll just go with this guy. And then the Titans hire Rand Carthen. He played in the NFL for a little bit as a running back, was on some of those Peyton Manning teams from Florida. He's from Florida, but then played with him with the Colts in like the mid-2000s. Talked to a guy today that worked with him with the 49ers. Loves him. Great leader. Impressive guy. Just kind of has some shit to him in terms of when he walks in the room, he's got a presence to him. To me, the only question with this job, are you just tasked with doing all the legwork and then Vrabel picking the players, or is Vrabel going to work with you? Then the elephant in the room is, does he like Trey Lance? Could Trey Lance be had this offseason? Would the Titans trade like a second-round pick for Trey Lance? And would the Niners think about doing it? Because I probably would. Now, I don't know. I mean, I've talked to Rand a couple times briefly through DMs over the years. He's been with the Niners for a long time, so he's had a front row seat of building playoff teams, the type players like him and Vrabel probably see eye to eye on the type guys they're looking for. I don't know if he was one of the guys pounding the table for Trey, if he wasn't all in on Trey, but that's something to keep an eye on. The Steelers keep Matt Canada. I would imagine Steeler fans aren't super happy, though. Kenny Pickett really started coming on at the end. And one thing the Steelers, I would say, historically do pretty well is like cohesion and chemistry. Like Mike Tomlin knows that. I don't think they just randomly kept this guy. Other than that, I mean, there are a lot of guys interviewing for jobs, pretty fluid. I don't think Jeff Saturday officially interviewed for the Colts. I still think he's got a very, very good chance of getting that gig, which is crazy to say if you're a Colts fan, but just be prepared. Before we dive into the games, one thing, I watched some of Aaron Rodgers interview. One last thing. I saw Elijah Moore. LaFleur, I always get them mixed up. Matt LaFleur is the Packers. Mike LaFleur was the guy fired with the Jets. I actually played golf yesterday with a couple guys from Long Island. And they were telling me, like, pissed off about big Jets fans, pissed off about Zach Wilson sucking and Robert Saleh and LaFleur. And I get it, because you're like, God, our team's pretty good. Why can't we never figure this out? And I saw The Athletic wrote a story that Elijah Moore, the wide receiver who was drafted a couple years ago in the second round, from what I've heard, high character guy, people love him, told Matt LaFleur after a week 6 game, after he didn't get any targets, go fuck yourself and you suck. And I've always had this thought. And, in football, it's a lot like the military. Whoever is your superior, you just answer to them, right? A lot of people in high school, college, and the pros at position coaches and coordinators answer to head. Like most head coaches are not like Pete Carroll or Andy Reid. There are a lot of head coaches that don't really know what they're doing. But when the guy's a head coach or you're a position coach, you're a coordinator, a lot of coordinators don't know what they're doing. When he tells you to do something, you do it. There's a hierarchy to it. And it's the way of the business, right? Where in business, I've always, like, I remember working in radio and I had this boss my last year before I got out of radio and went into podcast. I'm glad I did. Dumbest guy I've ever been around. And it's like, we were a corporation. So he was just middle management. It's not like it was his money. And it's not like I thought his ideas were any good. Now, I'm all for giving some respect at first, but eventually, you got to prove you can do something. So I'm not saying I'm on Elijah Moore's side here, but I'm also like, why do you just have to give superiors respect? If you own the business, I'm in business here with Coward. Now, obviously, I like Coward. I respect the hell out of him. But he creates the cash that's flowing in this whole thing. Without him, this does not exist. But in a lot of our businesses, and a lot of people you listening, you work for people that they ain't signing the fucking check. This is not their money. And I just have to answer to you why, because you have some title. I think you're an idiot. So I'm defending Elijah Moore here from the sense of I think a lot of players want to go. It's one thing to snap on a guy that knows what he's doing. Maybe LaFleur has no clue. Maybe LaFleur has no business being a coordinator. And I just think it's always funny that you just because a guy's a boss, like if he's a boss, if he owns the company for sure, whether I agree or not, like I got to answer to him. But if you're just middle management, it ain't your cash. You're an idiot. You just got it because you're buddies with some other middle manager that recommended you in the whole, corporate, hierarchy where half the people in the corporation don't even know who you are. I've always struggled with that one. Probably why I was meant to just kind of go into the world I've gone into. Aaron Rodgers. He told Pat McAfee, which I do understand this statement from an older player. Like, I'm not into rebuilds. I want no part of a rebuild. I'm into reloading. And that sounds great. And I think a lot of people, in sports say that. And it's cliche, but it's true. Like, if Tom Brady didn't want, and if he stays in the league, which I'm Tom, just retire, man. I love you. I think you're one of the great athletes I've ever witnessed. Anyone my age that's watched all your major games, it was an honor to not just watch you compete, but win and kick the shit out of people in the biggest moments. It was sweet. 45, man. Just go live. Go hang out with your kids. Enjoy your life. Get in the business world. Play some golf. Like, I don't want to see you diving at the ground when the pass rusher's coming at you anymore. It's not fun to watch. But Tom, when he went to Tampa, like they had a coach who'd had success in Arizona. They had a bunch of good players. Like, it was a kind of a quick flip, and he did. And they won the Super Bowl. And the next year they win the division again. They host a playoff game. Aaron Rodgers last year, all season long, it was like him and Gutekunst. They don't see eye to eye. Then they kind of figure it out. They get on the same page, and they have the devastating loss to the 49ers, which I thought they were a Super Bowl team. I picked them to win the Super Bowl at the beginning of that playoffs. It was devastating. That loss last year was more devastating than the Lions this year, because ultimately the Packers this year weren't that good. That Packer team, you can't lose that 49er team. That cannot happen. That was their worst loss of the LaFleur era. I think any Packer fan listening will have to agree. It's one thing to lose to Tom Brady in the NFC Championship game. It's one thing when your team's pretty average to lose to a Lions team, which actually is pretty talented. It's another thing to lose to fucking Jimmy Garoppolo, who's injured, who can't score a touchdown because your offense, which has dominated all season, scores one touchdown. That can't happen. But he chose, and it's not like when he re-signed with the Packers, he's like, Devontae's back. No, he knew Devontae was leaving, and he still chose to take the $150 million. And I have a life philosophy. Again, I celebrate people taking money. I am as pro-capitalism as anyone you're going to hear that talks about sports for a living. I love the business community. I'm all for taking cash. But I've always believed that, like, once you get to a certain level of money, you have to think about, like, is this the right decision? Right? Aaron Rodgers had more money than he ever needed going into that contract. So when he signed this contract, which everyone in the league would have given him a ton of money, is that where he wanted to stay because he wanted his legacy to be there because he thought he could still win? Or it was like, it was the easy thing to do, take the most guaranteed money, 150 cash, and then figure it out? Because if that was your mindset, just give me the most money right now, and then we'll figure it out. I don't have sympathy for you, because you had options and you had pushed for your options, and rightfully so. And then you decided to take this huge bag of cash, which is 100% you're right, but you don't get to complain about it a year later, especially when you know your right-hand guy, who's probably one of the, I think Aaron Rodgers has been on record, he's the best player you've ever played with, is not just demanding a trade, but they're going to trade him. So the moment you do that, like, you sign up for this ship that is now the Green Bay Packers. And then because of all the way this is not the NBA, right? Your contract, because of the way guaranteed money works, like, it impacts a salary cap. You're not easy to trade. It just becomes very, very complicated. And I do wonder if he knows what he knew now, even though a lot of us thought this the moment Devontae was traded, like, Aaron, now's your time to get out, and he didn't do it. And I just refuse to feel any sympathy for a guy that took all this cash and now kind of complains, like, rebuild, reload. He says he can still win an MVP, and I probably agree with him. Like, if you put him on, like, the 49ers, or you put him on shit with, like, DK Metcalf and some of these guys, Kenneth Walker, he traded him some teams you put him on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like, there are a lot of teams with a lot of talent that I think he could have a lot of success at. I think it's difficult in Green Bay, right? You got young players you're very dependent on. He's talking about, like, do we re-sign Randall Cobb? It's like, Aaron, I'm all for keeping you in the loop of who you want, but it's like, we need talented players here. My phone is just blowing up here. So I don't know. If you ask me what I think Aaron Rodgers is going to do this offseason, I don't feel good about, like, I don't think he's going to retire, but I think trading him is probably a little more complicated than it feels.